Kansas Territory, late spring, 1873. The dog's growl was low and mean, echoing through the alley like a warning shot. Zadie Pickett froze, her back pressed against the sun-warmed bricks of the dry goods store, her arms clutching a sack of flour tight to her chest. The animal's ribs showed through its matted fur, its eyes wild with hunger and heat. It crept forward, teeth bared, tail low. "Nobody's gonna hurt you," Zadie whispered, more to herself than the dog. She had tried to back away when it first came out from behind the saloon, but the alley was narrow and cluttered with barrels. Now there was nowhere else to go. Her heart pounded, sweat sliding down her neck despite the breeze. She took one shaky step sideways. The dog lunged. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Boots pounded the ground behind her, fast and sure. "Hey!" a man's voice snapped. "Get on now." The dog halted mid-charge as the man stormed forward, swinging his hat in one hand and raising his voice again. "Go on. Git." The mutt snarled, hesitated, then turned tail and darted off into the street. Zadie slumped against the wall, the sack slipping from her arms and landing with a soft thud at her feet. Her knees buckled. A hand caught her elbow. "You all right, miss?" the cowboy asked, steadying her gently. Zadie looked up, breathless. He was tall, sun-browned, with a rough jawline and dark blonde hair curling just beneath the brim of his hat. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, watchful and calm. Yes, she managed. "Thank you." "That dog looked about ready to tear into you," he said. "You hurt?" "No," she said, brushing hair from her face. "Just shaken." His grip loosened, but he did not step back. "Let me help you with that." He bent and picked up the flour sack with ease, tucking it under one arm. "Where were you headed?" "Home," she said, still catching her breath. He nodded. "Then I'll walk you." Zadie hesitated. "You really do not have to, I know," he said, offering a small, quiet smile. "But I want to." She studied him for a moment. There was no edge to his words, no arrogance. Just simple kindness, like the wind after a storm. "All right," she said softly. They stepped out of the alley together, the dusty street wide and still. A few folks glanced their way, but most were too busy with their own lives to notice. "I'm Warren Dale," he said as they walked. "Ranch hand out west, near Cottonwood Creek." "Zadie Pickett," she said. "Schoolteacher." He glanced at her, his mouth lifting a little. "You teach the children in town?" "5 days a week," she said. "Unless a storm closes the road." "You live alone?" She nodded. "Have since my father passed last year." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quieter now. "Thank you." She looked at him again. "I mean it, thank you. If you had not come." "I could not just let you get hurt," he said. They reached her gate, a small picket fence around a one-room house with a narrow porch and a line of laundry swaying behind it. He set the flour sack on the porch steps. "I should get back to the barn," he said. Zadie's hand twitched at her side. Part of her wanted to ask him to stay, to thank him properly, though she did not know what that would look like. She had not been close to anyone since her father died. Not really. And yet something about Warren felt solid, reliable. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked before she could second-guess it. "I just boiled a pot before I left." He looked at her for a beat. "I would like that." She stepped up on the porch and opened the door. He followed, ducking slightly under the frame. The inside was neat, with a table by the window, a worn rug, and a shelf stacked with books and folded linen. She poured 2 cups and handed him one. Their fingers brushed for a moment. "You always chase off stray dogs in your free time?" she asked lightly. "Only when they threaten school teachers," he said, and she laughed, startled by the warmth of it. They sat at the table, the sunlight spilling between them like a bridge. Warren took a sip and looked around her home, his gaze respectful. "You keep a good place," he said. "Got a quiet feel to it." "I like quiet," she said. "Too much noise makes it hard to think." He nodded. "Same on the range. I do not mind the long days. Gives a man time with his own thoughts." She watched him over the rim of her cup. His hands were calloused, his shoulders broad from work. But there was gentleness in the way he held the cup, the way he looked at her without expectation. "You came to town for supplies?" she asked. "Fence wire mostly," he said. "Boss likes things tight. Keeps the cattle from wandering." "Sounds like hard work." "It is," he said. "But I do not mind earning my keep." She smiled. "Neither do I." They sat in silence for a while, but it was not uneasy. It stretched like something easy and natural between them. When he finally stood, she walked him to the door. "Thank you again," she said, her voice softer now. "I was glad to help," he said. "You ever need anything, Miss Pickett, you just say." "Zadie." He nodded once. "Zadie." She watched him walk away, the dust rising behind his boots, his figure tall and steady against the fading sun. And then, slowly, she closed the door, her heart beating just a little faster than it had that morning. The storm came 2 days later, sweeping down from the Flint Hills with a sky the color of old iron and a wind that rattled the shutters like fists on wood. Zadie laid a towel along the sill to keep out the draft, glancing toward the stove where the kettle hissed low. The schoolhouse had been shuttered by noon, and she'd walked home early beneath a sky thick with warning. She didn't expect a knock. Folks didn't visit in weather like this. When the sound came 3 slow raps, she paused, damp cloth in hand. The wind howled again, but the knock had been solid, not windborne. She opened the door a crack, her fingers curled tight around the edge. Warren stood there, hat in hand, soaked through from the shoulders down, hair dripping against his brow. "I brought that fencing wire," he said. "Was on my way through when the sky turned ugly." She opened the door wider. "You're half drowned. Get in." He stepped inside, careful not to track mud past the rug. His boots left a wet print near the threshold as he eased the wire coil from his shoulder and set it down with a thud. "I reckon I misjudged the timing," he said, brushing water from his sleeves. "You could have been caught out on the open prairie if you waited much longer," she said, closing the door behind him. "I was aiming to make it to Jarrow's barn," he said. "Didn't figure the wind would whip up so fast." "Sit," she said, nodding toward the rocker near the stove. "I'll find something dry." He hesitated, then eased down into the chair, stretching his legs toward the warmth. She bent to the trunk near the hearth and pulled out a folded flannel shirt and a pair of spare trousers her father's, long since unused but freshly laundered for reasons she'd never quite explained to herself. "They'll be big on you," she said, "but dry." He took them gently. "Thank you. I'll change in the lean-to." She nodded and stepped aside. Rain pounded the roof in earnest now, and when he returned a few minutes later, his damp clothes folded under one arm, he looked more settled. The shirt hung loose at the shoulders, the trousers a touch short, but he didn't seem to mind. Zadie poured tea into a tin cup and handed it to him. "I appreciate this," he said, wrapping his hands around the heat. "You saved me the other day," she said. "This seems a poor return." "I didn't do it for anything in return." "I know," she said. Then, quieter, "That's the part one can't stop thinking about." He looked at her then, not startled, just steady. "Why's that?" "Because it's rare," she said. "Someone doing something cleanly, not for favor, not for show, just because." "I saw a woman in danger," he said. "That's reason enough." She nodded, but the silence that followed wasn't empty. It filled the room like the scent of rain, unspoken, but present. "You said you were on your way through," she said after a while. "Anywhere particular?" "Back to the ranch," he said. "We're moving cattle in a few days. Boss wants the herd closer to water." "Will you be gone long?" He glanced at the window, the storm still raging. "Depends how quickly the ground dries. Could be a week. Could be 2. She folded her hands in her lap. "I hope the weather gives you something fair to work with." He sipped his tea. "What about you? Will you still teach when the term ends?" "I intend to," she said. "Though come summer, things slow. Children help with planting or herd work. Some don't come back until autumn." "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. "When the wind gets too loud or the nights too long. But I don't know where I'd go." "There's plenty of land westward," he said. "But not much of what makes a person stay." She looked at him, her voice thoughtful. "What makes you stay?" He considered for a moment. "Work that matters. A place where I earn my rest. And lately, maybe something more." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. The fire popped and cracked between them, casting light against the walls. "When the storm clears," she said, "will you come back? Not just passing through. Not just because of weather or stray dogs." His answer came quiet and sure. "Yes, I'd come back for you." She stood and walked toward the window. The wind had eased some. The rain still fell, but softer now, like the sky had cried itself out. She turned back to him, her voice steady. "Then wait out the rest of it here. There's stew on the stove and enough time to talk about anything but the weather." He smiled, then quiet, genuine, and leaned back in the rocker, his eyes never leaving hers. "All right," he said. "I'd like that." The air was softer after the storm, washed clean, with the scent of damp earth rising from the fields behind Zadie's house. Warren had helped her carry in the last of the rain-heavy laundry before he left that afternoon. His borrowed clothes folded neatly and returned without a word. He hadn't said when he'd be back, but she'd noticed the way he lingered by the gate, thumb brushing the worn wood like he meant to remember the feel of it. By the following week, the schoolhouse was full again. The children's hands were calloused from planting, their voices bright with the kind of wild energy that builds when the sky clears and the ground firms beneath their feet. Zadie marked their lessons in the evenings, her fingers stained with chalk and ink, but her thoughts often drifted west, toward the cottonwoods and the man riding somewhere beyond them. He returned on a Thursday, just after the noon bell. She was sweeping the steps outside the schoolhouse when she spotted his horse tied near the well. He wasn't in the saddle, he was leaning against the rail, hat low, arms crossed. "You're early," she said, setting the broom aside. "I figured I'd wait till school let out, but I saw you and thought better of it," he said, pushing off the rail. "Didn't want to miss the chance to say hello." "You came all the way back just for that?" "I came back because I said I would." She stepped down from the porch, glancing at the sky. "You ride the herd in?" "They're settled by the river now. I've got a few days before we move east again." "How long will you stay this time?" "Long enough to ask you something," he said. "Are you walking home alone after the lessons today?" "I usually do." "Would you let me walk with you?" She nodded. "Yes." He waited while she dismissed the children, their voices trailing off down the road like birdsong. When they were gone, she closed the schoolhouse doors and slipped her shawl over her shoulders. They walked without rush, the road damp but firm beneath their boots. The sun hung low, casting long shadows through the prairie grass. "You ever wish you'd been born somewhere else?" he asked after a time. "I don't know," she said. "Sometimes I think about what might have been easier, but then I think about what I'd lose." "Like your students?" "Like mornings quiet enough to hear the wind moving through the wheat," she said. "Or the way the creek sounds when it's high after a storm." He scratched his jaw, thoughtful. I used to think I'd end up further west. Montana, maybe, but I kept finding reasons to stay close to here. She glanced at him sidelong. And now I'm thinking reasons can change, he said. If a man's paying attention. They reached her gate. The grass had grown taller since he'd last been there, and the lilacs by the fence leaned heavy with bloom. I've been thinking, he said. You and I don't know each other all that well yet. Not the way folks do when they make plans. Her hand rested on the latch. But I'd like to, he said. If you'd sit with me sometime. Walk with me. Let me learn what I need to. She looked up at him, her voice steady. You're not one to speak what you don't mean. No, ma'am. And I'm not one to waste time pretending I'm unsure when I'm not. He didn't speak, but his eyes held hers, open and sure. I've been alone a long time, she said. Not just since my father passed. Long before that, too. I forgot what it was to let someone close. Then let me be patient with you, he said. I don't want patience, she said. I want honesty. I want steady. I want someone who shows up when he says he will. I'll show up, he said. She opened the gate and stepped through, pausing just inside. Come for supper tomorrow, she said. There'll be enough. He nodded, one hand resting briefly on the fence rail. I'll bring bread, he said. Fresh from the smith's wife. She owes me for fixing her tack. She smiled, but it was quiet, settled, like the light just before dusk. I'll be here, she said. And as he turned back down the road, the wind carried the scent of lilac and warmed earth behind him, and she stood alone no longer. The next evening, Warren arrived just as the light was folding itself into dusk, the edge of the prairie glowing gold where the sun caught the grass tips. He carried a wrapped loaf under one arm, the brown paper still warm from the oven. His boots were dusted from the ride, and a patch of dried sweat darkened his shirt collar, but he looked unhurried, like he'd taken the long way on purpose. Zadie opened the door before he knocked, as if she'd been listening for his steps. You're early, she said, stepping back to let him in. I didn't want to keep you waiting, he said, handing her the bread. Still warm. She felt the heat through the paper and nodded toward the table. Set it down. Supper's ready. The table was already laid with 2 plates, a pot of beans and salt pork simmering beside sliced apples dusted with cinnamon. A small jar of pickled beets gleamed dark red in the center. Warren washed his hands at the basin and dried them on the cloth hanging by the stove, then sat across from her without speaking. The silence wasn't shy, it had weight, like a coat pulled close against an evening breeze. They ate quietly at first, the scrape of forks marking the only sound. Then Warren glanced at the bookshelf in the corner. You've got more books than I've seen in most ranch houses, he said. They were my mother's, Zadie said. She taught me to read when I was little. She used to say there was no excuse for a quiet mind. You take after her? In some ways, she said. She had a sharper tongue than I do, but she listened better than most. He nodded slowly, then reached for a slice of bread. My ma couldn't read past a hymnal, but she could find water under dry ground with a forked stick. Zadie looked up. A dowser. Some folks called her that. Others called her a liar. But she found more than one well in her time. Sounds like she was sure of herself. She was, he said. Didn't speak much, but when she did, you knew it mattered. Zadie poured him a second helping of beans. Her sleeves were rolled back, and a thin scar curved along the inside of one wrist. Warren's gaze caught on it, but he didn't ask. You ever think about marrying? She asked, not looking up as she spooned the food. I have, he said. Came close once, just after I hired on at the ranch. She moved back east before winter came. Said she missed trees. Zadie set the spoon down gently. I never came close. You must have had offers. Two, she said. Neither kind. Warren didn't press. He took another bite and let the silence settle again. Respectful, unhurried. When the meal was done, they carried the dishes to the basin. Zadie washed while Warren dried, their elbows bumping once, neither of them pulling away. The sky outside was deepening, soft purple stretching behind the hills. She lit the oil lamp on the windowsill and turned the wick low. I've been thinking about staying on, he said, folding the last towel. Not just through summer. Longer. She leaned her hip against the counter. Your work would let you? I'd have to ask. But I'd manage. She crossed her arms loosely, her voice quiet. There's room in town for someone steady. More than just work. I know, he said. They stood like that for a moment, the room warm with dish steam and lamplight. I'd like to walk you to school sometime, he said. I'd let you, she answered. He stepped toward the door but paused, one hand on the frame. I'll be back Sunday, he said. If you're not too busy. I'll be here, she said. He tipped his hat and stepped out into the cooling dark. She watched him cross the yard, the grass whispering at his boots. When he reached the gate, he turned once, lifting his hand in quiet farewell. She didn't wave back, just stood there, still as the house around her, with something new settling in her chest, something not loud, not sudden, but steady and sure. The Sunday sun rose slow and golden, warming the dew from Zadie's garden rose by the time she'd pulled her hair back and tied her apron. The house was quiet except for the rustle of leaves outside and the soft creak of wood settling. She moved through the morning with an ease she hadn't known in years, setting dough to rise and slicing early rhubarb for a pie. By the time Warren's horse appeared at the edge of the lane, the scent of sugar and warm flour was already curling out the open window. He tied the reins to the front post and stepped up with a small parcel in one hand and his hat in the other. Without waiting for her to open the door, he knocked once. She pulled it open and tilted her head. You brought something? He held it out, wrapped in faded calico. Darning eggs. Carved them myself. I figured your stockings might get their fair share of where walking to and from the schoolhouse. She took the bundle carefully, unfolding one corner. The wood was smooth, each egg shaped just so, with a small ridge carved around the edge for grip. These are beautifully made. I had time while we were penned up near the river, he said. And I don't like sitting idle. She stepped aside to let him in. You ever think about doing more than ranch work? He followed her in, his shoulders brushing the frame. I've thought about it. I like working with my hands, building, shaping things that last. You'd be good at it, she said, setting the eggs on the shelf beside her sewing tin. Your hands know patience. He watched her move toward the stove. I'd like to build something lasting, Zadie, but not just with wood. She paused, her hand resting lightly on the kettle's handle. He cleared his throat. I've been thinking, and I don't want to keep circling around it. I came back because I want to stay, not just near you, with you. She turned to face him fully. You mean marriage? I do, he said. Not right this minute unless you're ready, but I want to build a life here with you. I can't see the sense in waiting if we both feel the same. She walked to the table and sat, folding her hands. I haven't worn a ring in my life. I don't know what kind of wife I'd be. You'd be the kind who tells the truth, who doesn't waste words, who makes a home that feels steady. She looked down at her fingers. I've kept to myself for so long, Warren. I'm not soft in the ways some men like. I'm not looking for soft, he said. I'm looking for you. She stood, slowly, and crossed to him. When she reached him, she rested her hand against his chest, just above his heart. I want you to stay, she said. Not because you're trying to fix something broken in me, but because you see me as I am, and still want this. His hand came up to rest over hers. "That's exactly why I'm here." They stood like that for a long moment, the warmth between them quiet and sure. That evening, they ate the pie on the porch, knees touching beneath the bench. The sky burned orange over the prairie, and birds settled in the cottonwoods behind the house. Zadie leaned into him, content. He didn't rush her. He didn't ask again. He only stayed, each day after that, helping repair the fence line, mending the shed roof, riding into town with her when she needed flour or chalk or a bolt of muslin. By midsummer, folks in town no longer asked if he was just passing through. They were married in a small gathering behind the schoolhouse, under the same cottonwood trees that had shaded their first quiet conversation. She wore a pale blue dress, simple and well-stitched, and he wore a clean shirt and the same steady look he had given her every day since the storm. There was no preacher, just her, him, and two witnesses. Words were few, but strong. After, they walked back to the house together, hand in hand, while the sun dipped behind the hills and the cicadas hummed their low, endless song. He built her a second shelf for her books, just beside the window where she liked to sit and read. She added his darning eggs to her sewing tin, used them until the wood took on the polish of years. When the autumn came and the mornings turned sharp and bright, she still walked to the schoolhouse, but now with Warren beside her. He'd carry her ledger while she talked about the children's progress or the way the leaves dropped early that year. At the gate, he'd kiss her hand once before heading off to the smithy or the neighboring farm that needed a roof patched. Evenings were spent at the table, or on the porch, or in the quiet warmth of each other's company. There were no grand declarations. No need. Their love held steady, like the land beneath them earned, rooted, and enduring. And they were happy. Not the kind of happy folks wrote poems about, but the kind that grows deep enough to last through wind and drought and time. The kind that never once needed to be spoken, because it was lived in every small, quiet, faithful act.